Hey there! Did you know that more than 90% of people watching haven't subscribed yet? If you're enjoying the stories we share, just take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It's totally free and helps us keep creating the content you love. Claire Thompson lived a quiet life in the suburbs of Austin, Texas. She had married David Thompson 7 years ago after a steady 3-year relationship. They met in their late 20s when both worked for a marketing firm downtown. David was reliable, kind-hearted, and dedicated. He was the kind of man who never forgot to check if her car needed an oil change or if the pantry had enough cereal for their 6-year-old son, Ethan. Claire had once dreamed of something different, though. Not necessarily more, just different. She'd been a free spirit in college, an art major who spent late nights painting in the campus studio, drinking herbal tea with jazz echoing in the background. That was when she met Ryan Carter. Ryan had been a journalism student, witty and unpredictable. He'd challenge her thoughts, debate politics over coffee, and write short poems that he never showed anyone but her. They were young and deeply connected, but when college ended, life took them on different paths. Claire moved to Texas. Ryan traveled up the East Coast chasing freelance jobs. Years passed. Claire settled. She let go of her brushes and canvases, traded them for baby bottles and lunch boxes. David's job in a tech company kept them comfortable. He was not flashy or poetic, but he was stable. He loved her, and he was a good father. Claire appreciated him for that. Truly, she did. Still, something had shifted in her over the years. It wasn't that she was unhappy. It was more like a quiet numbness that had crept in while she wasn't paying attention. Days blurred into weeks, and weeks into months. She barely noticed it until one day she opened her old laptop to look for a file and stumbled across a college folder. Photos, videos. One of them was of Ryan reading something off his notebook, laughter erupting in the background from unseen friends. She stared at the photo for a long while, and then, on a whim, she searched his name on Facebook. There he was, same smirk, a little more rugged, still writing, now working as an editor for a mid-sized digital magazine in Chicago. She hovered over the message button. It took her 2 days to build the courage. Hey Ryan, long time no see, was going through old college stuff and saw your photo. Hope you're doing well. She didn't expect a reply, but he responded within the hour. Claire Thompson, now that's a name I haven't heard in a while. Wow, what a blast from the past. Great to hear from you. Would love to catch up. And so began a string of messages. At first, they were light, reminiscing about college days, professors they loved and hated, silly dorm stories. She told him about Ethan. He shared that he'd never married, that he'd been in a few relationships, but had trouble settling down. They started emailing, then texting. A month later, they began video calling once a week. When Ethan was asleep and David was working late, she laughed in ways she hadn't in years. Ryan remembered things about her that even she had forgotten. He asked about her art, and when she told him she hadn't painted in years, he was stunned. Claire, that's who you were. That's still who you are. Don't tell me you gave all that up. I guess I did, she replied quietly. Life happened. He didn't judge her, but he didn't hide his disappointment either. In their conversations, she began to rediscover pieces of herself she thought were long gone. She bought a small set of acrylics, started painting again late at night. Nothing major, just small canvases, blending colors, feeling textures. David noticed. He was happy in his usual calm way. It's good to see you painting again, he said one evening while drying dishes. Claire smiled but didn't say much. Ryan, on the other hand, was thrilled. He asked for photos of her work, gave feedback, even sent her links to small art competitions and online exhibits. He made her feel seen, not just as a mother, not just as a wife, but as Claire, who used to dream of gallery openings and art residencies in Europe. Then, Ryan came to Austin for a work trip. He mentioned it casually, not pushing anything. I'll be there for 3 days. Would be nice to meet up if you're free. She hesitated, but she didn't say no. It felt innocent enough at first. She didn't plan anything beyond a coffee. That's all it was. Just 2 old friends catching up after more than a decade. She told David she was meeting an old college friend, didn't mention a name. He didn't question her. They met at a small downtown cafe on a Tuesday afternoon. Claire wore a soft blue dress that Ryan had once complimented her on back in college. He was already there when she arrived, sipping black coffee and looking like time had been gentle with him. When he saw her, his face lit up. "You look exactly the same," he said, standing to hug her. She laughed. "You're a terrible liar." They talked for over an hour about everything, about nothing. They walked by the river afterward, just like they used to on campus. And when it was time to leave, he didn't ask for more, just gave her a long look. "Thanks for this," he said. "You have no idea what it means to see you again." The next few weeks were confusing for Claire. The messages became more frequent, the calls longer. Yeah, she tried to pull back, told herself she was being foolish, but something deep inside kept pulling her toward the connection she felt with Ryan. One rainy night, she and David were watching a movie after putting Ethan to bed. A romantic drama, slow and gentle. Halfway through, David reached for her hand. She let him take it, but her heart was elsewhere. It wasn't that she didn't love her husband. She did in her own way. But love, she realized, was layered, complex, and right now she was drowning in a longing she didn't understand. A part of her that had stayed dormant for too long had suddenly come alive. She didn't know what she was going to do next, but deep down she knew this wasn't over. Claire couldn't quite put her finger on what had changed, but something had. Since meeting Ryan in person, a gentle restlessness had taken hold of her. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet hum underneath everything she did. Folding laundry, cooking dinner, driving Ethan to school, all of it felt just a little off, as if part of her attention was always somewhere else, and the truth was, it was. Ryan was texting her good morning now. He would sometimes send her articles he thought she'd find interesting on creativity, parenting, or modern art. Occasionally, he'd share something he was writing. Claire had always loved his words, the way he framed simple moments like they were chapters in a bigger story. One evening after Ethan had gone to bed and David was in the garage fixing a leak in the water heater, she opened a new message from Ryan. "Do you ever wonder what life might have looked like if things had gone differently?" She stared at it for a long time. "All the time," she finally typed back. And just like that, something unspoken became a little more clear. It wasn't an affair, not yet, but it wasn't innocent either. Claire had always considered herself someone who believed in commitment. She valued loyalty, honesty, and she didn't wake up one day looking to test those beliefs. But life had a strange way of presenting choices when you least expected them. That weekend, David suggested they take a family trip. "Just the three of us," he said over breakfast, "somewhere quiet, maybe the coast." Claire smiled and nodded. "Sure, that sounds nice." They booked a rental cottage in Port Aransas, a simple place near the beach. The trip was sweet. Ethan built sandcastles and chased waves. David grilled burgers and tried unsuccessfully to fly a kite. At night, they played board games and made s'mores over a small fire pit. Claire took pictures. She laughed. She even held David's hand as they walked along the shore. But even in those beautiful moments, there was a tug inside her, like someone calling her name from very far away. Back home, things returned to normal. David went back to work. Claire resumed her freelance graphic design projects, mostly small jobs for local businesses and a school district newsletter. And Ryan was still there, waiting, watching, never demanding, always patient. One Tuesday morning, he texted her, "I have a crazy idea. I want to take a weekend road trip, just a break from city life. Thought you might want to come, no pressure." Claire sat with that message for hours. She didn't answer it right away. That night, after everyone was asleep, she stood by the window in her bedroom and stared out at the dark street. The trees barely moved in the wind. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once and went quiet again. She was 37 years old, a mother, a wife, a woman with responsibilities. But she was also a person with feelings she hadn't fully dealt with, a person who had built a life she didn't resent but didn't entirely feel at home in anymore. The next day, she replied, "Where were you thinking?" They picked a small town 2 hours outside Austin. Claire told David she was going to a weekend art retreat, a new women's group that met once a quarter. I just want to clear my head a bit. I think it'll be good for me, she said. David kissed her forehead. You deserve it. That Friday afternoon, Claire packed a simple overnight bag, 2 changes of clothes, her sketchbook, a book she'd meant to read for months. When she saw Ryan at the inn, it was like no time had passed. He hugged her, longer than necessary, but not too long, just enough to make her heart race a little. They didn't do anything reckless. They walked through antique stores, visited a small local museum, talked over dinner in a rustic restaurant lit by candlelight. It felt like slipping into another life, one that might have been hers in a different reality. That night, they sat on the porch of the inn, drinking tea and watching the stars. Ryan looked over at her. I miss this version of you, he said softly. Claire didn't respond. She couldn't. Her heart was full and confused all at once. He didn't push. He never did. The next morning, she woke up early and sketched the sunrise from her room's tiny balcony. When Ryan met her for breakfast, he slid a folded paper across the table. I wrote this last night, he said, after you went to your room. It was a poem. Simple. Honest. About a woman who had become the moon, always visible, always glowing, but always just a little too far away to touch. Claire blinked back a tear and folded the poem carefully into her journal. They drove back in near silence, both knowing that something had shifted, but neither naming it. Back home, Claire returned to her routine. But now, her dreams were louder, her questions harder to ignore. David didn't notice the details, the longer stares out the window, the subtle changes in the way she dressed, the faint scent of a different perfume. He just seemed happy that she seemed happier. But the truth was, she was torn. Ryan continued to be part of her days like an echo that refused to fade. They didn't meet again immediately, but their conversations deepened. They talked about regrets, about time, about the illusion of right choices. One night, as Claire tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at her and said, Mom, are you okay? She paused, smiled, brushed his hair back. I am, she whispered. Oh, just thinking a lot lately. He nodded and rolled over, already drifting to sleep. Later that night, Claire sat on the porch and called her sister, Emily, who lived in Denver. She didn't share everything, just enough to feel less alone. Sometimes I wonder if I settled too early, Claire said quietly. Emily paused. Everyone settles for something, Claire. No one gets every box checked, but if you're losing yourself, that's different. Claire didn't sleep well that night, or the night after. The pull toward Ryan wasn't just romantic. It was deeper than that. He reminded her of who she had been, who she might still be, if she could untangle herself from all the roles she'd adopted over the years. David, for his part, remained constant, kind, predictable. And that was both the comfort and the problem. Claire wasn't sure what she wanted, but she knew she couldn't stay in this limbo much longer. The next time she spoke to Ryan, he asked gently, Are you okay living like this, Claire? She didn't answer right away. I don't know, she finally said. And that was the most honest thing she'd said in weeks. Weeks passed. The warmth of summer began to fade into the first crisp whispers of fall. School started again, and Ethan's days were filled with spelling lists, soccer practice, and birthday invitations that cluttered the family calendar. Claire had pulled back from Ryan, not completely, but enough. Their messages became shorter, less frequent, still kind, still thoughtful, but not quite the same. She needed space to breathe, to think without influence. There was something inside her that needed sorting, and she couldn't do it if she was always caught between two worlds. David didn't ask about the art retreat again. He seemed happy just seeing her more present. They started cooking together some evenings, small talk flowing like it used to when they first dated. They even watched old comedy shows curled up under a blanket on the couch, laughing at the same jokes they had years ago. But Claire could feel the fault line beneath the surface, not because she didn't love her family, but because she wasn't the same woman anymore, and part of her wasn't sure if she could keep pretending. One quiet Thursday morning, after dropping Ethan off at school and finishing her last freelance task, Claire sat down at the kitchen table and opened her journal. Not the one where she kept her grocery lists or reminders, but the other one. The one where she wrote things she never said aloud. She wrote about Ryan, about David, about Ethan, about herself. And then, slowly, carefully, she wrote a letter. Not to be sent, just to be written. It started with, "I'm sorry I waited this long to admit how lost I've felt." She poured out her heart on those pages, her confusion, her guilt, her unmet dreams. The parts of her that missed the woman who used to get lost in colors and shapes, the parts that ached to be more than mom and wife and neighbor. It wasn't about leaving, it was about being honest. That weekend, Claire asked David if they could talk. They sat on the back patio after Ethan had gone to bed, the cicadas humming faintly in the trees. David was sipping from a mug of herbal tea, his eyes calm, open. "There's something I need to tell you," Claire began, her voice steady but soft. He nodded, setting the mug down. "I've been feeling like I'm not fully myself for a long time. Years, really. I didn't want to see it, and I didn't want to say it because it felt selfish, but it's become too big to ignore." David's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "I reconnected with someone from college. Someone I used to be close to. Nothing happened, not really, but it stirred things up. It made me look at my life, our life, and ask some hard questions." David was quiet for a long time, the kind of silence that feels both tense and respectful. "Are you saying you want to leave?" he asked. "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "I'm not trying to break our family. I just can't keep moving through life like I'm sleepwalking." David nodded slowly, his gaze steady on her. "I knew something was different. I just didn't know how to ask, or maybe I didn't want to." Claire reached for his hand. "I still care about you, so much, but I also care about the part of me I lost." David looked down at their hands. "Maybe we've both been avoiding the hard conversations." They talked for hours that night, about the early days, about how life had shifted from adventure to routine, how parenthood, while beautiful, had consumed parts of themselves they never fully reclaimed. They didn't argue, they didn't assign blame. It was simply two people finally speaking the truth. Over the following weeks, they made changes. Not drastic ones. They agreed to try therapy together and individually. They made space for honesty, even when it was messy. Claire kept painting. David joined a local running club. They stopped pretending everything was perfect and started building something more real. Imperfect, but grounded. And as for Ryan, Claire wrote him one final letter. Not out of anger or regret, but out of clarity. "You reminded me of who I used to be, and I'll always be grateful for that. But I need to rebuild that version of myself in my real life, not escape into something that can't last." She didn't wait for a reply. She didn't need one. Instead, she took Ethan to the art museum one Saturday, pointing out brushstrokes and color blends. She started a small blog about rediscovering creativity in motherhood. She and David went to a jazz concert one night, just the two of them, like they hadn't in years. It wasn't a perfect ending. Life wasn't a story with tidy bows. But it was a beginning. It had been nearly 6 months since that quiet night on the patio, since Claire and David laid everything out between them like scattered puzzle pieces. They hadn't fixed everything overnight. Some days were still quiet, filled with unspoken thoughts and cautious glances, but other days something remarkable would happen. Claire would laugh, truly laugh, and David would look at her like he hadn't in years. They were learning each other again, slowly, deliberately. One Saturday afternoon, while Ethan was at a friend's birthday party, Claire and David sat together at a small corner cafe downtown. It was the same cafe where Claire had once met Ryan months earlier. Only this time, it was different. She wasn't hiding anything. She wasn't searching. "I signed up for a local art show," she said, sipping her coffee. David looked surprised. "Really? That's great." "I'm nervous," she admitted. "It's just one piece, but it feels important." "I'm proud of you," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "You've changed, but in a good way." Claire looked down at their hands. "I had to find myself again, and I'm still working on it. But I want to do that here. With you." David nodded. We both lost parts of ourselves. Maybe this is us building something new, not what we had before, but something stronger." Later that evening, Claire sat in her studio. The spare bedroom she'd turned into a creative space. She pulled out a blank canvas. The house was quiet. David was reading in the living room. Ethan had fallen asleep early after too much cake and excitement. She dipped her brush into soft blue paint and made the first gentle stroke. This wasn't about Ryan anymore. It wasn't about who she used to be or who she might have been. It was about now, about a woman reclaiming her voice, her color, her purpose inside the life she had chosen, not outside of it. And for the first time in a long time, Claire felt peace. Not the kind that comes from escaping, the kind that comes from returning home to yourself.